So we're exactly 1 month away from being halfway through the year, and this is the period where we just wait for the next Assassin's Creed game to release, which of course is going to be Assassin's Creed Red later near the end of the year. So I got the random idea to make this video. If you've been watching me for a while, then you know I recently replayed every single Assassin's Creed game in 2023. This experience got me thinking about which of these games is the most replayable. Now I want to clarify that my opinions in this video are entirely subjective, based solely on which games I think are the most worth replaying a second, third or even fourth time. In fact, the straightforward answer I can give is honestly your preference, and your preference alone, which is exactly what this video is about, my preference. Also, try not to get this video confused with ranking every game, as this is definitely not that. Anyway, if you do enjoy this video, do consider hitting that subscribe button, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so just real quick before I go into this, Assassin's Creed Liberation and Freedom Cry are not mentioned at all in this video, as those games are no-brainers. Given their shorter length and limited things there are to do in these games, it's clear that these two games rank at the bottom for replayability. So let's just move on very quick and get into the real bottom of the list in terms of replayability, and that for me belongs to Assassin's Creed 1. While this game laid the groundwork for one of the most recognized video game franchises of all time, when it comes to replayability, Assassin's Creed 1 tends to belong at the bottom of my list for several reasons. First of all, the game simply suffers from repetitive gameplay, and I'm sure we can all agree on this. It's crazy because I remember this game being released, and I also remember this critique being around back then too. The game structure is way too formulaic, which for replayability is an absolutely horrendous combination. The lack of variety in mission design means that once you've experienced the story, there is little novelty or incentive to replay the game. Another aspect that affects the replayability for me is the lack of meaningful and significant side content. You see, later Assassin's Creed games are known for their larger worlds, filled with side missions, collectibles, and engaging things to do that actually complement the main storyline. Well, kinda. In contrast, Assassin's Creed 1 has a more barren world, where side activities do not offer any substantial depth. This is honestly understandable though, as it's a pretty old game. And finally, since this game is of course very old as I mentioned, this means that games after will have the advantage of a more technological advancement, whether it's graphics, user interface, the control systems, and just overall feeling. You know, it's mostly the controls though. Whether it's a controller or a keyboard or mouse, it's just not fun to go back to this game after playing a more recent game. Who knows, maybe with an Assassin's Creed 1 remake, which the series definitely needs instead of a Black Flag remake, this can entirely change. I mean, I could also mention that the very first Assassin's Creed game is rigid. You see, once the story is completed, there is little reason to revisit the game as the outcome is just fixed. And that's just simply the case for a lot of the games in this series. Next up might be considered the most controversial in this entire video. I don't know, maybe. Anyway, I've got Assassin's Creed Valhalla as the second least replayable. Now first off, you might think, well, it's a large open world RPG game, so it must be replayable. Well, not necessarily. Now I have to say this again, please remember that this is my personal preference. If I did the general opinion on which games are the most replayable, then Assassin's Creed Valhalla would be near the top. You see, the main reason that I put Valhalla so low is simply because the pacing of the story is way too unnecessarily long, and I mean way too long for an Assassin's Creed game. And yes, I know another large open world RPG game like The Witcher 3 is also very long, but the difference is The Witcher 3 is actually a good game. In fact, that's my most replayed game ever because of how replayable it is. Anyway, for Valhalla, as I mentioned, the story and pacing is way too long. You see, the game's story length is enormous, often requiring well over 50 or 60 hours to complete just the main story, and well over 100 hours for side content too. Now this can be considered a terrifying prospect for those people considering a second playthrough. The slow pacing of the story and even the progression can feel even more pronounced on playthroughs after, which just honestly deters a person from replaying the game. You know, maybe I'll replay this game on stream one day, if I ever decide to stream again. There is also the fact that the multiple endings the game has are so meaningless. You see, choices you make throughout the game do affect the ending, yes, but these choices are not implemented in a way where you know you're doing something right or wrong, and honestly those endings are not the best. Answer me this, when you finally finished Assassin's Creed Valhalla after growing a beard, are you satisfied or are you tired out by how long and boring that experience was? Even with the side content in Valhalla, I for one do not want to bother replaying those anomalies or stone stacking simulator things, as they provide zero engaging replayability. I guess the only positive thing I can say in terms of replayability is how immersive the world can be. It is nice to look at, but that's pretty much it. Assassin's Creed Rogue holds a unique place in the Assassin's Creed series, as it gives us a different twist by placing us in the role of a Templar instead of an assassin. Now, despite its very interesting premise and story connections between Assassin's Creed 3 and Black Flag, the game for me ranks lower in terms of replayability. Firstly, the main reason is Assassin's Creed Rogue is relatively short compared to the other games in the series. Its main story can be completed in significantly fewer hours than the rest of the games, which generally offer more expansive stories. Now this is kind of ironic considering the last section in this video was me saying Valhalla was too long, and now I'm saying Rogue is too short. You see, this short story length leaves less room for deep exploration or even character development, both of which are elements that typically encourage replayability. You may feel that once you have completed the story, there is little additional content or unfinished business that would warrant a return to the game. There is also the simple fact that Assassin's Creed Rogue recycles a lot of gameplay mechanics and environmental elements from Black Flag, particularly the naval combat and exploration aspects. I mean, think of it like this: if you had a choice to replay Assassin's Creed Rogue or Black Flag, I'm pretty sure 90% or maybe even more of you would choose Black Flag. While these features were revolutionary and well received in Black Flag, the repetition in Assassin's Creed Rogue without any new type of innovation or improvement can make a second playthrough feel familiar and less exciting, and that's the exact case I had when I replayed this game last year. There is also the fact that Rogue's setting isn't as exciting to me compared to every other setting after in this video. I guess a positive thing I can say when it comes to replayability is a few naval stuff, but other than that, it's not a relatively decent replayable game. It's one of those games I'll probably play again in like 2 or 3 years time if I ever get bored. Okay, so next up after Assassin's Creed Rogue, I've actually gone with my personal favorite ever Assassin's Creed game, and that's Assassin's Creed 2. Now, despite this game being the #1 for me in the entire franchise, I wouldn't say it's a game that I would die of excitement to replay. You see, to me, it's one of those games you just experience for the first time and that's it. It's a game you'd replay years and years later, not instantly after completing it. In fact, after you play Assassin's Creed 2, you just instantly want to play Brotherhood and then Revelations to complete the trilogy. Now let me explain why Assassin's Creed 2 is here in the video for replayability. First of all, even though the game has my favorite story in the entire series, I will admit it does start off slow. The first maybe 1 or 2 hours is fetch quests and briefly setting the tone. Now don't get me wrong, for a first playthrough, this is incredible and it's what we need. But if you're replaying a game, this might just seem tedious as you already know the outcome at the start. Also, when it comes to the side content, if you compare this game to, let's say, Brotherhood, a game that came after, it's not got the most replayable side content. I mean, there's collecting a lot of feathers and courier assignments. I guess the 2 missions are a standout, but that's pretty much it in terms of replayability. Oh yeah, and don't get me started on those codex pages. In order to progress the actual main story, the game forces you to collect every single codex page in the entire game, and I don't know about you, but replayability wise, the codex pages might make you put off replaying the game again. There is also combat. Now, even though this game is so iconic and legendary, its combat system is not the greatest. I mean, compared to games like Unity and the RPG games, I wouldn't really say the combat system is Assassin's Creed 2's strongest point. Now, after Assassin's Creed 2, we now have Assassin's Creed Revelations in terms of replayability. So we went from the rise of Ezio to the climax of Ezio, and if you think about it, this kind of makes the most sense. I feel like replaying a game that portrays a weaker Ezio, even though it definitely doesn't seem that way, as well as it being a kind of send-off story, it's not the greatest in terms of replayability, but it's far from the worst. Now, story aside, the gameplay in Revelations is pretty good in terms of replayability. We get introduced to a completely new mechanic with the hook blade, that not only improves the fluidity of parkour, but it also integrates into combat and environmental interactions. You see, this tool is great for quicker and more varied traversal of the city, which can be enjoyable to experiment with across another playthrough. Another massive positive for replayability is the bomb crafting system. When I first played Assassin's Creed Revelations, I completely overlooked this aspect of the game and kind of felt overwhelmed with the many varieties of bombs there were to use. But when I replayed the game, I definitely utilized this system a lot more, and it was honestly quite surprising because because it was so advanced to the point where you can experiment with it pretty well. The setting is also unique as it introduced something completely different that's not Renaissance Italy, which is a bonus. So yeah, the literal main reason I haven't placed this higher in terms of replayability is because it's a game that you don't really play if you haven't played the other previous two games. I feel like this is a game that would never be released in today's day and age. It's just one of those games. Okay, so we've approached the middle of the video, and also the middle of how replayable I'd like to think the Assassin's Creed series is. And after Assassin's Creed Revelations, I've gone with Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which I feel may be a surprise to put in the middle of this video. Now, one of the key strengths of Assassin's Creed Syndicate is that it makes replayability quite decent, because it introduces two playable characters, Jacob and Evie Fry. You see, each sibling has a very distinct personality, but most importantly, a specialized skill set. Jacob excels in close combat and has a more aggressive approach to missions, while Evie is stealthier and better suited for missions requiring subtlety. There's also how both characters have different skill trees, catering to two different playstyles. There's a total of 53 skills that can be unlocked, and are assigned to one of three trees: combat, stealth, or ecosystem. Now, one of the main reasons it's got a decent replayable sense is the black box missions. Now, these missions are designed to give you a high degree of freedom in completing the mission with multiple paths and strategies that can lead to success. One of the primary ways black box missions make replayability good is through the freedom they offer in how you complete objectives. You see, each mission type typically has a main target, but the way you reach and eliminate that target can vary. For example, you might choose to take a stealthy route, sneaking past guards and using distractions. Or you could do what I did and opt for a more direct approach, just fighting your way to the objective. I feel like this freedom encourages experimentation with different styles of play, which just seems ideal for another playthrough. I guess the weakest part about Syndicate is probably the narrative, as it's not exactly the greatest. It's a very cliche story, but apart from the story, there's a lot of positives that are great for replayability. Okay, so next up is what I believe a lot of people would consider their favorite Assassin's Creed game, as well as the most replayable. Now, just real quick, every game in this video from Black Flag to number 1 are top picks in terms of multiple playthroughs, so don't look at where it's placed in the video and assume it's bad. It's just that some have to come before others. Anyway, for Assassin's Creed Black Flag, first and foremost is the naval aspect of the game, which to me is a game changer that fundamentally alters the gameplay. You're able to captain your ship, the Jackdaw, which you can upgrade and customize throughout the game. You see, that excitement of naval combat combined with the ability to explore a beautiful world with islands across the Caribbean is what makes replayability stand out. Every island feels pretty fun to explore, with treasures, missions and secrets which just encourage exploration. I guess the real reason why this game is so good for replayability is simply because it's fun, and that's the straightforward answer I can give. Because the world is so big, the exploration aspect seems like it can go on for hours. So if you decide to play through the game just focusing on the main story, a second playthrough will help a lot. Especially with the likes of ship battles, as there are some pretty tough ships to take on. Oh yeah, and how can I almost forget those sea shanties? Some of those songs your crew plays just makes you want to put the controller down and take it in. Yes, this game might not have the most post-ending content to sink into compared to Syndicate, which I placed behind Black Flag. It's just honestly enjoyment. And at the end of the day, this video is my own opinion based on how much fun I would have replaying an Assassin's Creed game. Okay, so we're now moving on to the top 6, and this is where it starts to get quite difficult to put in order, but surprisingly I've actually gone with Assassin's Creed Origins. Now, a lot of you who watch my videos on a regular basis would know that I absolutely love this game. But after thinking for a while, I feel like the games after in this video are more replayable. Now, first of all, the obvious reasoning is the RPG side of the game. You can deeply engage with character customization through skill trees that offer varied playstyles and abilities. Whether it's focusing on archery, melee combat or stealth, you pretty much have the freedom to build your own style of play, which is ideal for replayability. The next reason it's great for replay value is the map size. You see, Egypt has such an impressive expanse in Origins, whether it's a large desert, explorable pyramids, and a very diverse set of cities. After the actual main story ends, you can pretty much do the various activities, including boss fights against actual gods, provided you've already explored every tomb, eliminated every target, completed every side quest, and unraveled every desert mystery. Now, I have not mentioned DLC in this video at all, but Assassin's Creed Origins DLC compared to the other games in this video actually feels like a new game entirely. Another reason is the weapon selection. This is honestly the same case for Valhalla and Odyssey too, where because there are so many types of weapons, whether it's bows, melee weapons and even shields, there's an incentive to replay the game trying out different combinations. And last but not least, there's even a new game plus mode, which is perfect for replayability. You can start a new game while carrying over your equipment, your abilities and progress, and unlocking skills from your initial playthrough. This also changes the difficulty and health of enemies too, which further makes replayability quite good. This one was a hard one to determine. Assassin's Creed Unity feels like a game that can either be placed near the bottom of this video, but also near the top in terms of replayability. But after deciding, I think it's pretty obvious that this game offers some great replay value. Now, despite initial criticisms largely focused on technical issues at its launch, the game has actually matured into a game that runs and feels pretty good. So technically, if you played at launch and experienced a technological disaster, I would 100% recommend to replay the game now in 2024, as it's just night and day. Paris in this game is so detailed, and it's one of those settings in the series that I feel just invites exploration with how unique each region of Paris feels. Co-op is a massive bonus for replayability, as let's be honest, it is something that's just endless, especially with the missions designed for playing with other people. And also, just like Syndicate, the black box missions in Unity are perfect for replayability with how open-ended assassination scenarios can be. Crowd blending, stealth, all-out combat, infiltration, you decide. These are all things you cannot do on your first single playthrough. There's even the side content that you can easily just skip over in your first playthrough, which is why I recommend replaying the game to do those helix rifts, murder mysteries, cafe theatre missions, and the Paris stories. Now finally, as I briefly mentioned, Unity has benefited from post-launch updates and patches that have resolved many of its initial technical issues, improving the experience by quite a lot. So I just recommend replaying the game if you have not. That rhymed. Okay, now moving into the top 4. This one was kind of confusing as it's part of a trilogy being Assassin's Creed 2 and also Revelations that I placed way lower in the video. But to me, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is a game that I feel has the most replay value out of the 3, and it's easy to understand why. This game took everything that Assassin's Creed 2 had in its gameplay and made it so much better. We get introduced to a new feature being the Brotherhood system that contributes to replayability quite a lot. You can essentially recruit and train novice assassins, sending them on missions across Europe or calling them for support during combat. This game is also what I like to consider the peak of Ezio, where he's on top of his game, even becoming a master assassin, so being able to replay that is pretty cool to me. Now this game has a strong emphasis on stealth compared to any other game in this series, except Mirage maybe. This means the missions are very stealth focused, such as the Leonardo War Machine missions, which are centered around retrieving or destroying Leonardo's war machines. The objective of trying to get 100% on these war machine missions is perfect for replay value, as you can just finish the mission in your first playthrough, and in your second playthrough just try and go for that 100%. Now for the first time in this franchise, the game lets you exit the Animus to take control of Desmond during the modern day. I don't know about you, but exploring the modern day is something that I love doing in Brotherhood and even Assassin's Creed 3. Another perfect replayable feature is the city management system, where you can essentially invest in the city, improving the area while building your Brotherhood. There are also the 2 missions that offer ample reasons to replay the game. You know, I'm probably forgetting a lot more stuff, but the positives 100% outweigh any negatives in terms of replayability. Okay, so here we are, the top 3 Assassin's Creed games that I personally consider my favourite to replay. And this may be a surprise, but my top 3 are actually pretty different. In fact, these 3 games are not in my personal top 3 favourite Assassin's Creed games. So yeah, make of that what you will. Anyway, at 3rd place, I went with Assassin's Creed Mirage, the latest game in the series. Now, I have not talked much about this game after it was released. That's because I found the game to be just decent. But after the recent update it got, it made the replay value of this game increase quite a lot. But first of all, stealth. The stealth in this game is what carries the gameplay for me. The setting of Baghdad is so perfect for stealth and is so refined to the point where it makes replaying the game quite fun. This game also introduces a new character development system that subtly incorporates skill progression without really the extensive and overcomplicated RPG mechanics of previous games. It's essentially more streamlined, focusing on skills that complement your own style of play. As you increase these skills, you can replay earlier missions to apply new tactics, making the gameplay feel fresh and engaging engaging each time. Now the main reason it's third in my video is because of its permadeath mode. This mode fundamentally changes how you approach the game. You see, knowing that Basim can be permanently desynchronized from 9th century Baghdad for dying or committing illegal activities such as killing civilians or venturing into restricted areas forces you to strategize carefully and consider each move. It makes a second playthrough of the game feel so different in the way you approach combat, stealth, missions, and just pretty much everything, making replayability feel so different. In fact, this is the only game with permadeath mode in the entire franchise, and it's something that I love to see in another Assassin's Creed game. Okay, so we're now at the top 2 in terms of replayability, and at second place I've gone with Assassin's Creed 3. You see, while the earlier games are considered the pinnacle of the franchise, and I would do anything to experience them again with memory loss, they generally offer less replay value compared to the newer games, which is entirely understandable. But this game is definitely an exception to that. Now for me, one of the main reasons that boosts Assassin's Creed 3's replayability is in its colonial open world. The game features multiple distinct cities and environments, including colonial towns, a large frontier wilderness, and just battlefield settings, each detailed and offering different replayable things to do. Take the frontier/homestead for example. The fact that you can play the entire game without ever touching the homestead storyline is just crazy to me, and if you have not played the homestead missions, it's genuinely like a new storyline entirely. In fact, it might as well be called Assassin's Creed 3 The Homestead. So replayability in that aspect is a 10 out of 10. There's also the fact that you can also play the entire game without experiencing the Captain Kidd missions, which are so underrated. In fact, I plan to make a video going in depth on the Captain Kidd treasure missions side of the game, as I find that to be one of the most underrated aspects of the entire franchise. I feel like the only criticism in terms of replayability for this game might just be that the prologue is quite lengthy, but it's not like it's boring, it's just very long. But apart from that, the two positives I said with the homestead missions and the Captain Kidd missions definitely outweigh the one quote-unquote negative that people might see. You know, I remember when I first played Assassin's Creed 3, and after like 5 hours of still playing as Haytham, I genuinely thought he was going to be the main character. That was until the game finally shifted to a young Connor many hours later. And last but certainly not least, we now have the number 1 replay value game in the entire franchise. And remember, this is all my opinion. Now, number 1 belongs to Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Despite what you may think about this game in regards to if it's Assassin's Creed or not, I feel like the replay value this game provides is something that cannot be overlooked. One of the main features that makes Odyssey so replayable is through the RPG side of the game. It's a confusing one, because even though Cassandra and Alexios are the same in terms of dialogue, there's something about each character that feels so different from one another. Is that just me? So for example, my first playthrough was with Alexios, and my second was with Cassandra, and the way they interacted with other characters and NPCs just felt so different. Beyond this, the game features a, what I like to think, complex dialogue system, with choices that genuinely affect the outcome of the story, including multiple endings. Let's say you get an ending you don't like. Well, the good thing is there's 9 goddamn endings, so replaying the game and choosing different choices will feel so different. For instance, choices made in dialogues or during key story moments can alter relationships with other characters, influence outcomes, or even lead to the death or survival of key characters within the story. These decisions are not always immediately impactful, but can culminate in major changes in the world, influencing which missions are available later on, how certain factions interact with the player, and ultimately which endings become possible. Yes, this game may not have the best story, but the fact that you can alter choices and endings makes it number 1 for replayability. Now, compared to Valhalla, where that game also has a few other endings, those are so subtle, and the way you get those endings are not as impactful as Odyssey. Now, while Assassin's Creed Odyssey generally does not restrict your exploration, allowing you to venture freely into areas suitable for different levels is something that makes replay value increase. So when you're going to a main story quest marker and decide to explore a cave or an enemy fortress as a quick side activity, you might find yourself slightly penalized. This happens when you later receive a new quest that directs you back to the same location you just cleared. You see, just knowing that certain locations might be revisited for future missions can influence how you approach exploration on other playthroughs. You might decide to leave some areas untouched until they are tied to a quest, thereby keeping the experience fresh and ensuring that each fort or cave visit feels purposeful to the storyline. I haven't even mentioned the world or the side content, as those are also things that make the replay value for this game so good. A lot of the side missions have their own arcs and dilemmas, and they contribute to the overall depth of the game's world. It's great because completing different combinations of these missions can lead to varied experiences in each playthrough that you pretty much do. So yeah, I can go on and on about how this game has a lot of replay value, even though it's not a personal favorite game of mine. So there you have it. This was my personal opinion on which Assassin's Creed games have the least replay value to the most. Now please remember, this entire video was my own opinion. I know for a fact that this topic of the video is so subjective, and I can guarantee that nobody will have the exact same opinion as one another. In fact, let me know down below what your top 3 is in terms of replayability. It'll be interesting to see how different everybody's answers will be. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and with that said, I'll see you in the next one.